Have you ever found yourself looking at someone and feeling that somehow this person carries a part of you? I'm not talking about something obvious or trivial, but that almost impossible to explain sensation, as if every word that comes out of their mouth was already stitched into your soul before it was even spoken. Maybe it doesn't even need to be a conversation. Sometimes it's just the way they look, that silence that doesn't bother you, the exact moment when your breathing synchronizes effortlessly, and you think, why does it feel like I already know all of this? The truth is, nobody talks about this directly, as if this kind of encounter were reserved for rare moments in life, a chance that happens to a few, but secretly we yearn for it. And even when we don't admit it, we continue searching for it in the people who cross our path. Have you noticed how hard it is to find someone who truly sees beyond what is easy to see, who looks at you not as someone discovering, but as someone recognizing something that has always been there? Isn't it strange how it feels like we're always living halfway, pretending everything is okay, laughing when it's not funny, filling our days with commitments that only serve to distract us from what really matters, until the moment when something or someone pulls the rug out from under you and you realize that maybe there are other paths, other ways to feel, other meanings that never crossed your mind. I don't want to convince you of anything, because deep down you already know. But I ask you, when was the last time you allowed yourself to hear what the silence is trying to say? When was the last time you made room to really feel what is here, now, without masks, without fear, without running away? What do you think you are missing? I want you to stop for a moment and think about what really matters to you. I'm not talking about the obvious things like work, bills, or the responsibilities we carry every day. I'm talking about the things you don't say out loud, but that scream inside you when everything around you falls silent. Those desires that you might have even forgotten to acknowledge because it's easier to let them go than to face the weight of admitting that they're still there. And when you connect with someone, do you feel that those hidden parts of you become visible? As if suddenly something lost begins to make sense. It's not just about talking or laughing at the same things. It's about realizing that what truly matters to you also matters to the other person. Not because they want to please or convince you of something, but because, for some reason, what they believe, what they dream, is deeply connected to what you've always sought, even without knowing. Have you ever stopped to think about why some people just seem right? It's as if there's something beyond what we can explain, as if values, principles, and even fears are shared in a way that can't be fabricated. It's not about perfection, far from it. It's about alignment, about wanting to walk in the same direction even if the path isn't always clear. And I know that sometimes it seems like a distant dream, as if it's something that only happens to others. But is it really? Or did you at some point stop allowing it to be real? Have you closed yourself off so much to protect yourself that you didn't even realize what you stopped seeing? Tell me, when was the last time you felt you didn't need to explain who you were? That the person beside you simply understood, because they were searching for the same. Because they knew that sharing values and dreams is not just a detail, but the foundation of all that really makes sense. And maybe you don't remember exactly how it happens, but you know how it feels when it does. It's that tranquility that emerges amidst the confusion, as if the world around loses a bit of its importance, because at that moment, what matters is right there in front of you. It's not about finding someone who agrees with everything, but someone who understands what you believe in even when they think differently. Someone who challenges you to be better without wanting to change who you are. Someone who, in some way, makes the weight of things seem lighter. The question is, are you willing to make room for this? Because, let's be honest, life pushes you towards such noisy and fast-paced paths that sometimes it seems easier to pretend that everything is fine as it is. And maybe it is, but what do you gain from that? Comfort? Safety zone? Is that enough for you? Or do you, deep down, feel that something is missing? That there is something greater? Something that you can't always name but know you need to find? It's hard to face this, I know. It's hard to admit that the easy paths don't lead to what we truly want. Because it requires courage, it requires letting go of distractions, fears, the narratives we repeat to ourselves to justify why we're standing still. And it requires, above all, a willingness to look around and notice the opportunities that might already be there waiting for you to pay attention. But are you looking? Are you listening? Or is there something inside you that still resists, afraid that if you open up you might find nothing? Have you ever noticed that sometimes the biggest blockage is within ourselves, not in the world, not in the people around us, but in what we build to protect ourselves? And the most ironic thing is that this protection, which was meant to save us, often keeps us away from what we truly need. It's like building walls so high that even light can't get through. And I'm not here to tell you that you have to tear everything down at once, because that would be unrealistic. But what if little by little you started to let in some cracks? What if you allowed something new to enter, even if only to see what happens? Now I ask you, what would you do if you met someone who not only shared your dreams, but was also willing to walk with you, even on the toughest days? Someone who sees value in what you believe, in who you are, without needing you to justify or explain yourself. Someone who looks at you and not only sees, but recognizes. Are you ready for that? Or are you still running away in some way? Look inside yourself now. It's not something you do often, I know, but do it, just for a moment. Take a deep breath and tell me, when was the last time you really felt in sync with someone? Not just talking about superficial things or filling the silence with empty words, but living a moment where everything flowed effortlessly. Not because you were trying, but because somehow it seemed like it was meant to be that way. Do you know that feeling when you don't need to measure what you say, don't need to think twice before being exactly who you are? It's rare, I know, and perhaps even a bit scary, because most of the time, we are so used to molding ourselves to fit the space people give us that we forget how it is to simply exist. But you've had that with someone, haven't you? That laugh that comes without warning, just because the other person's presence is light. And I'm not talking about someone who takes all your problems away, because that's impossible, but someone who, just by being there, makes everything seem less heavy. And there's something so subtle in that, something you might not even notice at the time. How conversations don't seem to need effort. How time passes, and you don't feel the need to fill the empty spaces, because they simply are part of what you are living. And yet, there's an energy there, an exchange you cannot force. You feel that what's missing in you is somehow there in the other person, and what is overflowing in you the other welcomes, as if they always knew what to do with it. But let me ask you, why do you think these connections seem so rare? Is it because people don't show up? Or is it that on some level, you yourself avoid exposing yourself in this way? It's not easy, I know, because it requires you to let go of control, to stop trying to predict what the other thinks or feels and simply be there, wholly without masks, without tricks. Can you do that? Do you want to? And now think about how it would be to find someone who doesn't try to complete you, but who understands your gaps, who doesn't mold you, but still seems to fit. Someone who doesn't need grand events or demonstrations, because what matters happens in the simplest moments. A look, a smile, a shared silence, and even if you can't explain, you feel. I know this may seem distant, perhaps even impossible, but what if it's not? What if deep down you always knew this existed but were afraid to believe? Because if you believe, you also need to admit how much you've been running away from it. Not for ill will, but because letting things truly flow means relinquishing control. And who likes to lose control, right? Have you ever had the feeling that certain encounters simply can't be explained? Not like something magical or exaggerated, but as if something was happening there that goes beyond what you can see or understand. That moment, when two stories intersect in such an improbable way, yet at the same time makes so much sense that you can't ignore it. It doesn't matter if it was a glance, a word, or even silence. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Maybe you've gone through this and let it go, thinking it was just a coincidence or that it wasn't worth trying to understand. But what if it wasn't? What if in some way this happened to show you something you weren't ready to see yet? It's not about forcing explanations or seeking answers where they don't exist. It's about recognizing when something is trying to tell you that there's more, that there's meaning behind things that seem small. Have you ever stopped to think about the connections that escaped? About the people who crossed your path but, for some reason, you didn't pay attention to? Maybe because it seemed like the wrong moment, or maybe because you were so focused on other things that you didn't even notice what was right there in front of you. And the most curious part is that Even so, these memories remain. No matter how much time passes, something inside you still holds on to these sensations, as if reminding you of what could have been. But now I want you to think about something different. Think about what you can still experience. Think about the stories that haven't started yet, about the people who might already be around you, but whom you haven't truly seen yet. Why do certain things happen the way they do? Why is it that sometimes you feel like you already know someone, even when you've just met them? It's not about believing that everything has a definite reason, but about realizing that there are moments that seem loaded with a meaning that isn't easily explained. And when you feel this, what do? Do you ignore it? Do you close off? Do you pretend that you don't feel what you feel because you're afraid of being wrong? Or do you allow yourself to explore, even if it's uncertain, even if it takes you out of your comfort zone? Because what happens in those moments is unique. They don't come back. And what you choose to do with them is what defines what comes next. Sometimes it feels like life is testing you, putting these coincidences, these little unexpected connections in your way, just to see if you are paying attention. But are you? Or are you so distracted, so caught up in your own justifications, that you don't see the opportunities that are arising? And the most interesting thing is that when you start paying attention, everything seems to fit together in a way that didn't make sense before. You realize that some stories have common points, that some people share parts of your past or even your dreams, even if you've never talked about them. It's as if somehow the pieces were already there, just waiting for you to allow yourself to put them together. But there's no point in waiting for everything to happen on its own. There's no point in thinking that these connections will strengthen just because they exist. You need to do your part, you need to be present, you need to open up. Because if you don't, they pass, like so many others have passed. And then you ask yourself, what could I have done differently? What did I lose by not being willing to see? Have you ever felt that you've known someone for much longer than you really have? As if the conversations flowed in such a natural, simple way that it seemed impossible that you didn't have a history together before. And maybe that's just the way you connect. Or maybe it's something that goes beyond, something you haven't understood yet, but that doesn't need to be understood to be real. Now tell me, when was the last time you allowed yourself to believe that these connections aren't just coincidences? That they can be an invitation to something greater, something you've always wanted but never knew how to find? Maybe it's time to put aside this idea that things only happen by chance. Maybe it's time to start paying more attention to what life is trying to show you. Have you ever experienced that feeling of being completely at ease with someone? Not because the person said or did something specific, but because somehow being next to them just makes you feel that you are enough. As if there's no need to prove yourself, to be more, to hide the parts that you consider weak or imperfect. When was the last time you felt like this, or rather, have you ever felt like this? It seems that most of the time, we are defending ourselves, showing only the parts that we think will please, hiding everything that we consider wrong or too heavy. But is this really necessary? Or does it only distance us from who we really are? And more importantly, does it prevent us from finding someone who sees all these parts and still chooses to stay? Because deep down, that's what you want, isn't it? Not someone who likes the perfect version of you, but someone who looks at all the layers, even those you yourself have difficulty accepting, and says, it's all right. Think about how it would be not to need to hide anything, not needing to measure your words, not needing to filter your thoughts, not needing to plan your actions to ensure that the other does not pull away. How would it be to feel secure enough to simply be? It is not a common feeling, I know, because we are so used to dealing with criticism, expectations, and judgments that when someone accepts us completely, it even feels strange. But isn't that exactly what makes everything more real? Have you ever noticed how sometimes the truest relationships are not those where everything is perfect, but those where you feel safe enough to be vulnerable? It is not about avoiding difficult moments, but about knowing that, even in them, you are not alone. It is about trusting that no matter what happens, that person is there, and not because they have to be, but because they choose to be. And now I want you to think, what would it take for you to feel like this? Not just with someone, but with yourself. Because before finding that confidence in another, you need to find it within yourself. You need to be willing to really look at yourself without judgments, without filters, and accept everything you see, because only then will you be ready to let someone else do the same. But don't be fooled. This doesn't happen out of nowhere. You won't wake up tomorrow and suddenly feel completely secure in all your relationships. This is built up. It's a process that starts with small choices, small actions, small steps. It means deciding every day that you deserve this kind of connection, that you deserve to feel seen, accepted, loved, exactly as you are. And of course, this also means being willing to offer the same in return, because to create this space of trust, you also need to be willing to see the other person with the same care, the same compassion. You need to be willing to accept the other's imperfections, just as you hope they will accept yours. And this is not easy. It requires patience. It requires effort. It requires a type of courage that we are not always willing to have. But it's worth it, because when you find it, everything changes. Now tell me, what's holding you back? What makes you doubt that this is possible, that this is real? Is it because you've never experienced something like this? Or is it because somewhere you believe you don't deserve it? Because if that's the case, I need you to understand something now. You deserve it. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to feel accepted. You deserve a connection that isn't based on what you do or say, but on who you are. And yes, this requires you to let your guard down, to put aside the masks, the defenses, the walls you've built over time to protect yourself. But tell me, what are these defenses really protecting? Are they really helping you, or are they keeping you away from what you desire most? Because at the end of the day, what you really need isn't protection, it's connection. And this only happens when you are willing to show yourself completely. Have you ever stopped to think about what it would be like to meet someone who makes you feel that way? Someone who looks at you and sees beyond your words, beyond your actions, beyond your defenses. Someone who understands what you feel, even when you can't express it. Someone who doesn't try to change you, but at the same time makes you want to be better. Not out of obligation, but because with this person everything seems possible. I know this might seem like a distant dream, something that only happens to others. But why not you? What stops you from believing that you can also experience this? Perhaps it's the fear of being disappointed. Perhaps it's the doubt that something so good can really exist. But if you never try, how will you know?